Hello, hello everybody. Please excuse me a moment while I just finish pasting some information I have on my clipboard into a document before I lose it, because I'm bound to lose it. I'm sure to lose it. That just is the way it happens. Anyway, and save as. Nearly there. Nearly there. Almost. Yes, please save it. Thank you very much. Right. And there we are. Done. So, hi, how are you? I do hope you're having a good day today. Oh, it's Friday, so here we go. Formal Friday. Let's put the tiara in. There you go. You can kind of see it. I'll see if I can bring it a bit further forward and a bit further up. There, so you can see. Anyone would think I hadn't done this before. Obviously, when I put it in, I usually put it too far back so you can't quite see it. That'll do. You can see it now. Anyway, how are you? What are you up to? Have you been having a good week? I hope you have. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, does it? Yeah, anyway. I'm also going to connect my phone to Twitch so I can keep an eye on it, just because it's meant to be. Oh my goodness, I'm so behind today. I thought I was ahead, but I'm behind. Do you have days like that? And you think it's just you. The reality is it's actually everybody has days like that. Nobody has perfect days. Nobody lives the Instagram life. Seriously, that's just not realistic. Okay, that's going. I don't need to, no, except it's got volume on. Turn the volume off. We don't need to hear ourselves 2 or 3 times. 1 is enough. And it doesn't need to know where I am because it knows where I am, kind of, you know. It's not like I'm going anywhere at the moment. What else? Nearly there, I think. I've got my cursor in the right place in case I start typing. Right, I have my cup of coffee that I'm still finishing because I haven't got any milk at the moment, so it's a long black. And it's because it's made with our very strong coffee. It's rather intense. So yeah, long black instead of a flat white. And I'll try and finish it in time for it to not keep me up too late tonight. Do you have your favourite drink that's appropriate for the time of day that you're here? Do you have some water to keep yourself hydrated? I do. Yay, I remembered. Do you have a snack? I have speculaas, which are Dutch spice biscuits. And that's just the way I say it. I don't know how you actually say it. And they have patterns printed into them. They're all cinnamony. They're wonderful. So those are my snack for today. And they're very noisy because they're quite crisp and crunchy. And they're yum. So do you have something to eat, something to drink, and somewhere comfortable to sit? Because if you have, we're just about ready to go. I suppose I better introduce myself for anyone new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories. Welcome, and I hope that somewhere in amongst all the various stories that I read, you find something that really suits you. I've been doing this for, a year and a half maybe. Old-fashioned children's stories because they give us another world, another way of looking at the world to what's currently going on. And a lot of people have forgotten about the old stories. The stories I read are generally ones that I grew up reading, my parents did, and so did my grandparents. They were normal books for me. If you're watching this on Twitch, you'll see a picture up here of the current book that we're reading, which is called The Sun's Babies by Edith Howes. The style of that cover was very common for the sort of book that I grew up reading because I was reading books that my grandparents had been reading, and they had shared them with me and they became my books. So currently I am reading on an iPad mini, a first generation iPad mini, purely because that's what I have and it's handy and it works. And I love being able to keep old technology still working instead of it going into a tip. I can't put any new apps on it, I can't update anything on it, but it works for downloading books and reading books on. So might as well use it, make the most of it. What else? I live in New Zealand. That's the NZ in my name. And that's the way we say it here in New Zealand, is NZ, not Z, it's Z. It makes it sound better for the way we say it. I'm over 50. In fact, I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50. Hence the grey hair. No, it's not a special dye job. That's just the way it is. And I'm proud of it. I don't have to hide it. Sometimes I put a little bit of colour in. You can see where I've had a little bit of bleach in there. That was purple for a little while just because, hey, why not? But I'm not trying to hide the whole lot. That's me. Oh, and I do rough reads. Rough reads being I have ADHD as well as autism, as well as being on the autism spectrum. I get distracted very easily. So what happens is I will be reading you a sentence in a book, and sometimes my brain will just go, oh, what's that over there? And I have to try and remember where I got to on the page and whereabouts in the sentence I got to so that I can carry on. Most of the time it's not a problem. But also sometimes I will mix up words when I'm reading. That's just how it is. So when people ask me what I do when I'm reading books on Twitch, I say, audiobooks, the idea of that, but not like that, because they're not perfect. My reads are rough. I have mispronunciations. I have restarts on lines. I interrupt myself to explain things, kind of like what I'm doing now. And I don't chat during a chapter, but I will chat between chapters. So if you're listening to one of the videos or watching one of the videos and happen to randomly start it in between chapters, you'll find me chatting away like I'm doing now instead of actually reading the book. But then we get back to the book and we chat about all sorts of things. Sometimes it will actually be to do with hair. Sometimes it will be to do with cooking. I've given cooking tips. In fact, I should find which video that is and tag it and say bonus cooking tips on that one, just because, why not? And also rough reads, the other part of the description of my rough reads is that they're more like bedtime stories. I don't know if you ever had bedtime stories when you were growing up, but I did. So did my kids. And you'll be reading a story, your parents will be reading a story, and there's something that they say which doesn't quite make sense. So you interrupt and you ask what that is, what it's about. I do that to myself while I'm reading for you. Because I've grown up reading such a wide range of books, I'm aware that I'm very familiar with a whole lot of ideas and words that most people these days aren't. And if I think that a story is not going to explain what those words are, because to them at the time when they were writing it was very normal, so it didn't need explaining, I will actually pause the story reading to explain it. Also, I've had a reasonably broad range of life experience. I mean, that's what comes when you're nearly 60 and you've lived in more than one country. And so since most of my books are based originally in England, not like the current one, and I've lived over there and travelled a bit over there and been to different places and done some different things to what everybody does, if there's something relevant in the story, relevant that I've experienced, I will pause the story to explain it if I think that's actually going to fill the story out a little bit more for people who are listening. So anyway, with all that in mind, I'm going to stop talking and start reading. I just have to unlock my iPad. Sometimes it takes a moment or two before it happens. Oh, there we go. That was quick. Whew, yay, that's good. Anyway, so here we go. I am reading The Sun's Babies by Edith Howes, and we are reading the part of the story called Of Royal Blood. Now, The Sun's Babies, I'll just explain something, interrupting already. The Sun's Babies is not a chapter book where you have one story that flows from chapter to chapter elaborating on things along the way. It is a collection of little mini stories about different things to do with nature and wildlife. The lady who wrote it, Edith Howes, was a teacher, and she thought that it was a really good idea if children learned things as much as possible from real life. So they were taught things in the classroom when she was teaching them, but she tried to relate it back to things that they might have seen or experienced themselves, because it helps them to understand it better. So she also realised she could actually write these children's stories that would explain some things that don't normally get explained in that era to children, and explain them in a way that might make them a little bit more appealing to children. So you have fairies in the trees that have jobs to do, and it's all to do with things like making the plant grow, the tree growing flowers, the flowers being pollinated, the pollen helping seeds to form, life cycle within nature and all this sort of stuff, and all sorts of different things. There's plants, there's insects, there's weather and seasons, all that sort of thing. So she was giving explanations of a lot of this sort of stuff, but in story form, so they sounded a little bit more interesting for the children she was writing for. So we are going to carry on, and I am reading a section called Of Royal Blood. She was certainly a very grand princess. From the first, the nurse bees fed her with rich golden honey instead of the bee bread that the common children received. She had a royal bedroom too, very much larger than the others. At mealtimes the nurses were always waiting with her honey. All day long they guarded and watched her and fanned fresh air with their wings into her bedroom, so she grew big and strong. Hang on, I think I've read this chapter. I better just check. I'm pretty certain that I have read... No, that's not the section I wanted. I did. I'm sorry, I started you on the wrong chapter, or wrong section. Oops, my tiara's falling out. Let's put it in again and see if we can get it to stay a bit better. Oh well, that'll do. So we're not reading Of Royal Blood, we are reading Sally Snail's Wanderings. There you go. I smell strawberries, said Sally Snail. They are somewhere across the road. I shall go and find them. Nonsense, said the others. It is too dangerous a journey. There are always boys and carts and birds and all sorts of monsters on the road. You will never reach the other side alive. I am going, said Sally. She started off on her strong, creeping foot, leaving a shining wet trail behind her. Her curly shell covered her back, but her head was thrust well out, so that the eyes on her two long horns could see the roadway and give warning if danger were near. With her shorter horns, she followed the scent of the strawberries. Did you know that? On snails, they have the big long ones and then they have some little ones. I knew that much. And I knew that the big long ones had the eyes on the end, but I didn't know that the shorter ones were for smelling. I wonder if that is actually what they really are for. Probably, since that's the way this lady writes. I'm going to carry on. With her shorter horns, she followed the scent of the strawberries. Halfway across the road, a starling saw her. He flew down at once, thinking he had found an easy tea. But Sally Snail was too quick for him. In an instant she drew her head and foot into her shell and sat down so firmly on the ground that the starling could not move her. He pulled at the shell, but he could not pull it off the ground. He pecked at it, but he could not pierce it with his beak. I will wait till you come out, he cried. You can't stay here always. But a boy came running down the road and threw a stone at the starling. The frightened bird flew off, and Sally Snail continued her journey. The boy did not notice her, so she reached the hedge in safety, crawling through, and found the strawberries. What a feast she had! She cut pieces out of the sweet fruit with the files in her mouth, because they have rasps, files, that they use for biting with or chewing with, unlike us with teeth. Sucked them in and swallowed them. If the others knew how good these are, I am sure they would all come too, she thought. She stayed there till all the strawberries were gone, and then she had to go back to eating leaves again. "There is a cabbage garden through that next fence, I'm sure," she said one day. "I shall go and see." So she travelled next into the cabbage garden. Here she found her cousins, the slug family. "Dear me, how strange you all look," she said. "Why don't you grow shells on your backs?" "Don't give yourself airs. We have as blue blood as you," said the slugs. They were touchy about their soft backs. "How cross you are. I shall go and visit my cousins in the pond," said Sally. However, the cabbages were very good, so she stayed till they were all cut and taken away. That's by the people who were gardening. So there wasn't any food left. Well, not much. Taken away. Then she crossed the garden, slipped through the fence, and came to the pond. Here her cousins, the water snails, were gliding across the top of the water, shell downwards like a boat, and foot up like a sail. I've not seen these sort of snails, have you? Like the foot was up like a sail. I've never seen sailing snails. "Oh, how lovely to be able to do that," said Sally as she watched them. "I have found you again," said the starling, coming down with a swoop and a sharp peck. Sally slipped into her shell, but this time she was not quite quick enough. The starling had caught one of her long horns and now flew off with the eye from the end of it. So he'd picked it off. "Doesn't matter," said Sally. "I can easily grow another." She crept under a bush and lived there for a time, and when she came out again, another eye had grown at the end of the horn. "I shall go home now," said Sally. She went home and told the others all about her travels. "We must certainly cross to the strawberry garden next year," said the snails, "but now winter is coming fast. We must bury ourselves." They crept into the ground, sealed up the mouths of their shells with lime so that no enemies could enter, and went to sleep for the winter. There you go. I learned all sorts of things about snails in that section. I didn't know that they could regrow their eyes. I didn't know that I did know that they sealed the end of their shells when they were underground, but I didn't know it was part of hibernating, and I didn't know that they used lime. There you go. And I didn't know that water snails could sail across a pond, and that they used their foot. Coffee time, because we're in a chapter break. And that also means water. Yes, not a good idea to have too much coffee without having plenty of water. Keep yourself hydrated. It helps your brain to work well. And then we're on to the next section. Milli Mushroom. She was tiny at first and quite brown. Her mother laid her gently on the ground and said, "Creep down into the warmth and grow." So Milli crept down into the warmth and grew into a little white girl as thin as a thread. For a year she stayed under the ground with her brothers and sisters, and then they all put on their best velvet hoods and puffed themselves up to go up into the world. Billy Button sprang up first. He called down to Milli, "Come up, little sister, the sun is shining through a silver mist and everything is glorious." "I am not quite ready," said Milli Mushroom. "I must grow bigger first." She puffed herself out as fast as she could, and at last was ready to go up. She tied her hood over her face to keep the wind off her soft cheeks. Then she too sprang up. "Oh dear," she said, "how strange it feels up here." "You will soon grow used to it," said Billy Button. "Hurry up and grow, and turn pink like me." Milli grew and turned pink like Billy Button. Then she untied her hood and peeped out, showing her soft cheeks and pretty white collar. "What a great world it is," she said. "It is all so wide and high. I am a little afraid." "This is only a bit of the world," said Billy Button. "I know, for the flying beetle told me. He has travelled far and has seen wonderful sights. Ah, how I should like to travel." "I would rather stay at home," said Milli. She was trembling a little. Everything seemed strange up here in the strong light. "Grow close to me," said a friendly thistle. "I will shelter you with my long arms." She stretched out one of her arms and Milli nestled beneath it and was comforted. All that day and night, she and Billy Button grew so fast that when the next morning came, they hardly knew one another. Have you ever noticed that? Mushrooms appear to spring up overnight in the fields. Because they do. They grow very fast. "How big you are, Billy," said Milli. "So are you," said Billy. "You are quite a mushroom lady now. But goodness gracious, whatever is that? What a monster! And how it shakes the ground!" A boy was walking over the field with a basket in his hand. He was gathering mushrooms. He stooped and pulled Billy Button from the ground. "Oh, the cruel monster! Oh, poor, poor Billy!" sobbed Milli Mushroom. But Billy was not at all frightened. "Hurrah! I am going to travel at last," he cried. "Goodbye, Milli. I shall see the world now." He was popped into the basket and carried off, while Milli was left shivering under the thistle's arm. That's probably why she hadn't been picked. She soon forgot her fright, however, though she often wondered what happened to Billy Button and whether he enjoyed his travels. She grew taller and bigger every day and changed her hood for a big, flat hat so wide and shady that the little field mouse could sit under it and talk to her, and the thistle covered her from sight with its friendly arms, so no monster ever found her to put her in his basket and carry her off. Yes, no one's going to go looking under thistles to find their mushrooms, because there's much easier pickings in the rest of the field away from the thistles, away from those prickly bits. And we're on to the next section. Wiggle-Waggle. That's an interesting one. Mrs. Earthworm made a hole under the ground and put an egg in it. Round the egg she wrapped clear jelly to serve as food for the little one when it should hatch. Then she went back to her burrow. Soon Wiggle-Waggle came out of the egg. He was the tiniest worm you could imagine, but he had a fine appetite. He ate all the jelly his mother had left for him. Then he began to nibble at the earth, and he liked it so much that he went on nibbling. There were all sorts of nice things in it, scraps of leaf and stalk and root and seed, just the things he liked best. The more he ate, the bigger he grew. Soon you would hardly have known him. One day he thought, "I wonder what it is like above the ground. I will go up and see." He began burrowing in an upward slanting direction, breaking down the earth with his hard little mouth and swallowing it out of the way. At last he reached the surface of the ground and poked his head through into daylight. But he drew back quickly into his burrow again, for the strong light hurt him. He could not see it, for he had no eyes, but he could feel it on the skin of his head, and he did not like it. "It makes me feel quite ill," he said. He pulled some loose earth into the mouth of his burrow and coiled himself round till night fell. Then he came out once more. Things were very different now. The air was cool and moist and delightfully dark. Hundreds of neighbour worms were crawling over the ground, feasting and talking and visiting one another. "Oh, there you are at last," said his mother from the next door burrow. "I have been listening for you. Fix your tail into the top of your burrow and sway yourself round and feel for your food. Then you can slip back easily if an enemy comes near. There are many enemies about, so listen carefully and never stay up till daylight comes, or a bird will catch you." So Wiggle-Waggle entered into the busy night life of the garden. At first he followed his mother's advice, keeping his tail in the hole while he felt for green leaves, dragging them into his burrow. Later he grew more venturesome and crawled out over the ground to make the acquaintance of his neighbours. He lined his burrow with soft leaves and gathered tiny stones together to hide the entrance from the eyes of his enemies. Life was busy and pleasant, and he grew big and strong. But one night he stayed up too long. When the red light of morning sprang up in the eastern sky, he was quite 3 feet from his home. He hurried, darting his head far forward as he could reach, sticking his front bristles in the ground, drawing his body up in a loop, dropping it, and then darting his head forward again. He went swiftly, but not quite swiftly enough. An early blackbird saw him and swooped down upon him. His head and half his body were already in his burrow, but the blackbird's beak closed on his tail. He stuck all 4 rows of sharp bristles like tiny pins in the ground and held on for his life while the blackbird pulled hard for its breakfast. Snap, crunch, tear. It was dreadful. Poor Wiggle-Waggle parted in the middle and the blackbird flew off with half of him. Wiggle-Waggle was not dead, but he felt very unwell. He wriggled down to the bottom of his burrow and kept very quiet for a long time. And a wonderful thing happened. New rings of body and then a new tail grew on the broken end. And soon he was a whole worm again, with only a join mark to show that an accident had happened. When he goes up at night now to feed and visit his neighbours, he is very careful not to stay too late. He is still living in his old home, unless the last heavy rain has flooded his burrow and washed him out. There you go. Did you know that worms, when they get broken in half, that they can grow a new half on the right bit? I kind of knew that, but I'd forgotten. That does not mean go out and chop worms in half to see if they'll grow again. That's not nice. Don't do that. But it's nice to know that they can keep on going, even if they have been half bitten off by a bird. Good that the bird gets some food, I suppose. We have blackbirds. They come and land on our back lawn, and they're looking for worms and bugs and other bits and pieces. And the cat, you see them early morning and late afternoon, early evening, and our cat has to stay inside at night. So we shut the door, and the cat will sit there looking through the glass of the door out at the back lawn and watching these blackbirds coming, and thrushes landing on the back lawn, and sometimes he'll make funny noises at them like he really wants to chase them and jump on them, because that's what cats like to do. That's partly why he stays inside at night, because cats catch more things when they're out at night than they do during the day, and I'd much rather he didn't catch things, especially birds and things like that. Obviously, we are between sections, so I've just finished my coffee and now I'm having some more water. And it's your turn too. Right, we shall carry on. The next section is the Leaf Fairies. In the wood, the Leaf Fairies were busy making their leaves. They made them of every shape and size, for each fairy had their own idea of what looked prettiest. Sorry, my mouth's a bit itchy. Some made them long and narrow like tall and graceful ladies. Some made them round and dumpy like fat little men. Some made them heart-shaped, and some cut up the edges till they were all dainty points and curves. Some placed them sitting down on the branches, while others set them up on slender stalks. There was no set rule for anything. Each fairy followed her own pretty fancy. Oh, here's a picture. One of the very, very few in this book. In the wood, the Leaf Fairies were busy making their leaves. And there you go. Can't see it very well, but there's little characters all over the place. I will try and put them over on our Discord, the pictures over on our Discord server, so that you can have a look at what the pictures are like. Actually, I will give you the link now when I find the right keys to press. There you go. There's the link for Discord. So you are welcome to come and join us on Discord. And if you find illustrations to do with, or pictures to do with something we've been reading in the stories, and you think that others might be interested in sharing it too, don't assume they're not, by the way, then do come and join our Discord server and share them with us. It's great to actually see other pictures that people have found that illustrate stories in your mind. I'll just find out where we got up to. Each fairy followed her own pretty fancy. Most of the leaves were green, but a few were splashed with yellow, or veined with red, or lined with silver. Everywhere they covered trees and bushes and low-growing ground plants, growing here in clusters and there singly or in pairs. The fairies swung themselves far out on the branches to admire their handiwork. Now you must be busy, they said to the leaves. In the daytime you must help the roots to gather food for yourselves and all the family, roots and stems and flowers and seeds. And at night, when we have swept the passages, you must throw out the rubbish. That's the dead leaves, I think. Shall we never have time to play? Asked the leaves anxiously. Yes, said the fairies. When the family is fed each day, you may dance with the winds and play hide and seek with the sunbeams. And when the autumn is here and all your work is done, we ourselves will take you for a pleasure trip. The leaves were content and at once set to work. The fairies made tiny kitchens for them, and here they gathered the food for the family and prepared it for their use. The fairies carried it to the roots and stems and flowers and seeds, so they all grew strong and well. At night the fairies swept the passages so clean that not a grain of dirt was left anywhere. The leaves threw out the rubbish from the kitchen doors. Summer passed and autumn came. You have worked well, said the fairies to the leaves. Now you shall have your pleasure trip. They dressed the leaves in gay frocks, all gold and crimson and bright brown. They loosened them from the trees and set them floating on the wind. Now follow us, they said, and the fluttering leaves followed them. First they whirled and danced on the ground beneath the trees. Then they rose up in the air and flew away, away, nobody knows where. You have not seen you could not have seen the fairies leading if you had been there, for they are not visible to mortal eyes. But you would have seen the leaves following them. Where they went to, I can't tell you. They never came back, though it is said that the fairies did. So that's probably because she was trying to explain why sometimes it doesn't look like there's lots of dead leaves on the ground. Obviously, in other times it does. Next section. Bunny Boy. Now, Bunny Boy, said his mother, look after the house while I am away, and mind you do not go outside, for there are boys about today. What nonsense, thought Bunny Boy to himself, as if I could not run faster than any boy, and I have been waiting for a chance to go and see the world, so I shall go today. Obviously he didn't tell his mother that. As soon as the bunny mother was out of sight, he slipped out and ran away. This naughty bunny boy, with his little white tail bobbing and his eyes shining with delight. Now I shall see what the great world is like, he thought. He came to a skylark, sitting on her nest. Good day, Lady Skylark, he said. I am going to see the world. Would you like to come with me? Oh dear, no indeed, said the skylark. I have to sit on my eggs. Does your mother know where you are going? Bunny Boy ran off at once. He did not want to answer that. He came next to a little green hill where other bunny boys and bunny girls lived. They all came running out to see him and said, Stay and play with us. No, he said, I am going to see the world. Where is that? They asked. Somewhere over that big fence, said Bunny Boy. You may come with me if you like. We do not want to come, they said. You stay here with us. But Bunny Boy would not stay. He ran off again. The others called out, We will tell your mother on you. But he only ran faster. He went through the big fence and came into a field of oats. Here men were busy cutting the oats, and Bunny Boy was so frightened by the noise they made that he scampered out of that field, and into the next. This was a field of grass, and Bunny Boy thought, Now I can begin to enjoy myself. Just then he heard a bark, and a big dog rushed over the grass after him. A boy came with the dog, and now poor Bunny Boy had to run for his life. How did he run? But the boy could run too, and the dog could run too, and he nearly caught Bunny Boy. His mouth with its sharp teeth was just open, ready to snap on Bunny Boy's back, when Bunny Boy saw a hole in front of him, jumped into it, and was saved. At the bottom of the hole he found a bunny house and some kind bunnies who let him stay there till the dog and its master had gone away. Then he crept out and went sadly home. I will always do what you tell me, he said to his mother that night. It was dreadful out in the world. I would much rather stay at home and mind the house. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. At least he didn't get injured or caught by the dog. And he did learn the lesson from his mother. Oh dear. Well, I suppose that's the sort of thing that happens, isn't it? she's been very nice to us, this author. She's not giving us all the horrible things that happen in real life, which is kind. Well, mind you, she's writing it for children, so she's giving us the possibilities without actually frightening us off with the realities. We will carry on, shall we? Actually, no, I'm going to have a nibble on my biscuit. They're very nice biscuits for this time of year. I must see if I can get some more. They would make very good Christmas biscuits. Not necessarily iced, but nice and cinnamony spiced. I just hope they're not too noisy for you. And the other thing we do in the breaks, have a drink of water. Go on. So, what have you got going on? What time of day is it where you live? Because in this day and age, with having the internet, it's actually very much a wide world. I can be reading to you live, and I can have somebody over in England listening to me at the same time, and it will be after afternoon tea time here. I was just looking at the clock on my other monitor, and it will be, sorry, I'm just checking something, and it will be nearly time to get up for most people over there where they are in England. A little bit early for that, but you know, most people over there would be sound asleep unless they're up doing shift work or something like that. And it's just one of those odd things, isn't it? Anyway, we shall carry on reading. And don't forget, if you've missed me watching or reading it live, you can listen to the VODs. They are saved afterwards for 2 weeks, or you can watch them on YouTube when they go up over there after the 2 weeks is up. We shall carry on. I have no idea what this one is. Love Mother. A potato and a rusty nail lay side by side in an old shed. That's an odd start to the story. Through the winter they found very little to say to one another, but when the spring came the potato grew restless and talkative. "This is a poor life for us," she said. "Do you not feel that it is a waste of time lying here like this?" "Not at all," said the rusty nail. "If you had been knocked about as much as I have, you would be glad to lie still." He was bent in the back and had lost half his head, so he had a right to talk. "But I want to grow," cried the potato. "I want to go down into the dark, warm earth where it is so easy to grow. Then I should send up white stalks that turn green when they reach the sunlight and bear broad leaves and beautiful flowers. My children would grow on my white stalks under the ground. Ah, that would be life indeed." "You seem to be talking nonsense," said the nail. "I once lived in a kitchen where a great many potatoes were cooked every day, but none of them had the beautiful leaves and flowers you talk about." Yes, the view that we have of the world is different to the view that somebody else has of the world because of the experiences that they have. Once again, I am trying to see something that's around the other side of something on my desk. Hence me looking sideways like that. Nearly there, nearly there. That will do. Right. "You seem to be talking nonsense," said the nail. "I once lived in a kitchen where a great many potatoes were cooked every day, but none of them had the beautiful leaves and flowers you talk about." But the potato was not listening now, for something seemed to be moving inside of her. "I feel so strange," she cried. "I'm sure something is going to happen." The next moment, something did happen. The skin was pushed open and a little white shoot pushed its head out. "I am growing," cried the potato joyfully. "Oh, I wish somebody would put me in the ground." But alas, nobody understood potato language, so she lay there for several days longer. Then a little boy who was playing saw her and picked her up. "Here is a potato growing without any ground," he said. "I shall plant it in my garden." Isn't that a lucky potato? He carried her to his garden, made a hole, and planted her. She nestled thankfully down into the warm earth as he covered her up. "At last I am put into my right place, and I can really grow," she said, and grow she did. Shoot after shoot ran up from her sides, spreading out in the sunlight into broad green leaves and beautiful lavender-coloured flowers. And the little potatoes came all along the white underground stems. Bigger and bigger they grew, till they were as big and as fine as their mother had been. How proud she was of them! But as they grew, she dwindled and lost her strength, for she was giving all the substance of her body to feed her children. "What is the matter, little love mother?" they asked tenderly. "Why do you grow so weak and thin?" They did not understand where their food came from, but she knew and was well content. "It is my life, but they need it, and I am happy in giving it," she said softly to herself. So day by day she grew less and less, till with a loving sigh she died. "I am happy," was her last thought, "for I have done my part in the world, and now, like the rusty nail, I am glad to rest." That's different. But yes, have you ever dug potatoes? Or have you only ever bought them? If you've ever dug potatoes, after having planted them especially, you will find at the base of the stem and where the roots are all coming out from that the new potatoes are growing on, that there is a little old wizened up, dried up remnant of a potato there. And that's the original one that the plant grew from and that the roots grew out from and the new potatoes formed on. Not all of their nutrients come from the original potato because you get a lot more of them, and there's no way that she provided all of that. But the starting point of all the nutrition that those parts of the plant need came from that original potato. And so if you get potatoes that you've bought and they start to have sprouts coming out of them, and you could try planting them in the ground and seeing if they grow into more potatoes. But you need to leave them under the ground for long enough. There. Usually until after the flowers have died. Anyway, we shall carry on. We are reading the next section, which is called The Hill Princess. It was when Roy and Charlie were out rabbit hunting that they met the Hill Princess. They had gone much farther than they usually did, and that is how they found her. It was in a long gully at the foot of the tallest hill of all, and she had come down the side of the hill to meet them. She was tall and beautiful, and her robes were as green as the grass in the gully, while her crown was all starry white clematis flowers. "Have you had a good time?" she asked. The boys were too shy to speak at first. She was so grand and wonderful, but they knew it was polite to answer when you were spoken to, so Charlie plucked up courage and said, "Yes, thank you." "That is right," she said kindly. Then she stood and looked at them for quite a long time, while the boys grew shyer and shyer under her searching eyes. At last she spoke. "I am trying to feel your hearts," she said. "I can feel those of my own people at once, but yours are hard to understand." The boys did not know what she meant, but they were too shy to ask. She went on, "I should like to show you my palace, but I must first know whether it is safe to trust you. Can you keep your word?" "I can," cried both boys at once. The thought of seeing the palace took away their shyness. "Well," said the princess, "if I take you to the palace, you must first promise not to tell anybody about it, not even your mothers. No mortal has ever before seen it, and I do not wish others to come to look for it. So you must not tell them about it. Do you promise?" The boys promised at once, and the princess said, "I shall always hold you to that. See that you keep your word. Now come." They followed her a few steps up the side of the hill. Here she stopped and tapped with her foot on the ground. Instantly, a door flew open in the hillside, and they entered. The door swung to behind them, and they found themselves in the princess's throne room. It was a magnificent room, wide and lofty. The walls and roof and floor were all of glittering limestone, lit up by magic star-shaped lights of brilliant colours. In the centre stood a throne of solid gold, with a rug made of crimson flower petals thrown half over it. "Don't the petals fade?" asked Roy as they admired the beautiful rug. "Nothing fades in my palace," answered the princess. She led them from room to room, talking kindly to them and showing them quite proudly all the beauties of her home. It was indeed a wonderful palace. Each room was different from all the others. In one, the walls were made of gold, in another of silver, in another of opal, and in others of emerald or ruby or diamond, until one's eyes almost tired of the brilliance. The furniture was as beautiful as the walls, but the boys noticed that the chairs and tables and sofas and beds were all made very low, except those for the princess herself. Indeed, so close to the ground were they that Charlie asked the princess, "Are your people very little, hill princess?" The princess laughed. "Come and see them," she said, and led the way out to the back of the hill. Here they found themselves in an open space covered with grass and flowers and little bushes. On every side rose a high straight bank covered with bush creepers, and behind the bank rose tall bush trees to hide the place from view. "This is our playground," said the princess, "and here are my people." The boys looked round eagerly. All they could see were rabbits and hares and birds and insects. Rabbits and hares and birds and insects everywhere, hundreds of them, playing on the grass, amongst the flowers, in the bushes. The boys were puzzled. "Where are the people?" asked Charlie. The princess laughed again. "The hill creatures are my people," she said. "There the animals can talk and work and play as you can. The hares and rabbits do the work of the palace, the birds fly in with our food from the surrounding country, and the insects take our messages. So work is provided for all. For their play they come out here, and here they are so much at peace with one another that everyone is safe. To hurt anything is impossible here." Now all this time Charlie had been thinking, what a grand place for rabbiting. So he looked up with a rather red face at the princess's words. She knew what he was thinking, for she said, "See if you can touch little Hoppy." She pointed as she spoke to a wise-looking rabbit who sat close to her feet, looking up at her with loving eyes. I'm sorry, I've got a tickly throat. Roy and Charlie both bent down to catch little Hoppy, but they found to their astonishment that although he sat quite still, they could not touch him. Again and again they tried, but every time something seemed to push away their hands. It was not the rabbit. He never moved. Neither was it the princess. She stood smiling beside them. "It's magic," said the princess. "Come and play marbles," said little Hoppy. The boys jumped. So the rabbits could talk in this strange place, could they? And play marbles too? Why, yes, there were several marble rings in the playground, with bunnies and birds all playing together and chattering as fast as any crowd of boys, and hares were playing leapfrog, and groups of bush robins were nursing tiny dolls. "Well, this is a comical place," said Roy. "May we go and have a game?" he asked the princess. The princess shook her head. "It is too late today," she said. "You must leave us now, or it will be dark before you reach your homes. But keep your promise to me, and I will give you a stone that will guide you to the palace another time. Then you may come earlier, and so have time for a game." The boys were overjoyed. "That will be first rate," they said. "When may we come again?" "The moon was full last night," answered the princess. "Come always on the day after the full moon. See, these will guide you." She picked 2 small stones off the ground and gave them one each. As she touched them, they gleamed and shone like opals, but when the boys took them, they lost their light. "Do not lose these," she said. "If you keep your promise, these stones will guide you to the palace and open the door for you." She took them back through the palace and out onto the hillside again. The boys thanked her and said goodbye, and she went in, shutting the door behind her with a word. When it was shut, you could not tell it was there, for the grass and tussock grew over it. Roy and Charlie went straight home, talking all the way about the wonderful things they had seen and heard. "We must watch carefully for the next full moon," said Roy at his gate as they stood for a moment to say good night. "Yes, indeed," said Charlie. "What a time we shall have." Then he hurried home. "Have you had a good time, Charlie?" asked his mother at tea time. "Rather," said Charlie. "I don't believe anybody ever saw so many wonderful things as we saw today." And then he grew so excited at the thought of it all that he forgot about his promise and told his mother and father about the princess and the palace. He knew, before he had finished, that he had done wrong, but that did not stop him, and the worst of it was that neither his father nor his mother believed him. His mother at first looked very grave and asked him if he had been in the sun without his hat, but his father said, "Nonsense, the sun was not hot today. See that he doesn't read too much, Mary. We don't want him to learn to spin yarns like this." Then he was sent to bed. Roy did not break his promise. He told his father and mother about his rabbiting and about things he saw on the hills and in the gullies, but he said nothing at all about the princess and the palace. It was hard to keep silent when it was such a wonderful secret, but he remembered his promise. And that is how Roy found the palace again, but Charlie did not. When the day after the full moon came, they both started out, but Roy's stone led him straight to the palace, while Charlie's led him all afternoon away from it. They were magic stones and had power to punish and reward, so Roy was led to the princess and had all sorts of wonderful games with little Hoppy, while Charlie, because he had not kept his word, was led astray and not allowed to follow Roy or find the palace for himself, and he has never found it yet. There you go, that's a little bit different from the rest of the stories we've had. Goodness me. Right, we shall carry on. Urchins in the sea. Do you know what sea urchins are? They are not like little children who live on the street. I have no idea where that idea came from. Anyway, we shall carry on. Baby Urchin was vexed. "The grown-ups have all the fun," he said to his brothers and sisters. "Every day they play on the beach, while we are told to stay here amongst these stupid rocks and seaweeds. On the beach they have glorious times. I have often heard them talk about it. Why shouldn't we go?" "Yes, indeed," said the others. "Let us all go." They swam eagerly from their playground between the rocks, the queerest babies you ever saw. They looked as if they were made of chalk and glass, and each had about 12 long arms sticking straight out in every direction from the funny white body. That's interesting. How odd. They were fast swimmers. They went gaily on, never thinking of possible dangers, but a hungry fish saw them and came straight at them with wide open mouth. Snap! The cruel jaws closed together, and 100 baby urchins fell down the great throat. Then those who were left turned and swam for home as fast as their terrified arms could take them. I would think so. Oh my goodness, that might be a little bit scary if you were a baby sea urchin. "You were very disobedient and you all deserved to get eaten up," said the grown-up urchins when they heard what had happened. "And besides, it's no use coming to the beach yet. You can't possibly roll on the beach with those long arms of yours." "It seems to take such a long time to grow up," said baby urchin. Eat plenty, said the grown-ups, then you will soon be like us. It's a very interesting concept. Lots of things, not mammals, but lots of other creatures, also not birds, lots of other creatures have different forms when they're young to what they do when they're adults. And so what she's been showing us is describing as the young form, the juvenile form of a sea urchin. I don't know that I've ever seen a picture of one. That will be something worth looking up sometime. Time passed. The little urchins did not again try to reach the beach, but they ate plenty and they grew big. Then they began to change. Their funny arms grew shorter and shorter till they disappeared altogether. Their bodies grew thicker, and then at last their shells began to come. Now we are growing up, cried baby urchin joyfully. Their shells grew fast, and so did the babies inside, changing their shape altogether. Up and down the round shells ran rows of tiny holes, and in between the rows of holes, scores of little white balls grew outward. On the balls, movable spines grew, and through each hole peeped a new leg ready to stretch far out when it was needed for swimming or walking. Under the shell was the mouth. From it 5 strong white teeth hung down to crush the seaweed and break it up for food. On top of the shell were tiny eye specks. At last they were ready. Come on, cried baby urchin. Nobody can hurt us now. He led the way to the beach. They all followed, swimming with their legs and spines and looking like hedgehogs in the sea. What a time they had when they reached the beach. They swam in with a wave, rolled over and over on the beach, burrowed with their tiny spines in the soft sand, and then swam out with the next wave. It is splendid to be grown up, they said. Just don't stand on them. They hurt, and the spines can snap off and get stuck in your foot. And the effect of that is basically that, it gets infected. Not good. But that is how they defend themselves. There you go. Yeah, no, I'm not a fish going to eat those spiny things. We'll carry on with the next section, where white waves play. Part 1, Red Bill. I'm not sure how long this one is actually. I might just see by going right back to the beginning of the book. No, right back to the beginning of the book and finding the list. No, next one. Oh, okay. Urchins in the sea. Where white waves play. Red Bill, the Sea-Squirt who stood on his head, Bobby Barnacle's wanderings, goodness me, there's a whole lot. So it's a whole lot of little stories, even littler stories, I suppose, about different characters within the sea, because most of our stuff up until now has been on land. Where white waves play. Part 1, Red Bill. In a sand-strewn hollow of a rock ledge on a tiny island lay a seagull's egg, yellow and grey and brown, to match the yellow and grey and brown of the sand and rocks. White waves played beneath it, dancing each day to the foot of the ledge and throwing handfuls of spray up its rocky side, but never breaking over the top. Sea winds whisked above it, but never blew it from its sandy bed. No hungry hawk spied it from his vigilant soaring place. No hunting dog found it. Safe from harm and quickened by the genial sun, that's kept warm, by the genial sun and the warmth of the mother's tender breast, the speck of life inside the egg grew slowly to a seagull baby. When the baby first peeped out from the soft darkness of his mother's sheltering wings, the world looked very wide and dazzling. Obviously he's hatched by now. Overhead the big blue sky shone brightly. Sunshine flooded all the air. Nearer home gleamed points of light, like little stars, flashed on all sides amidst the sand. He drew in his head. Oh, that's the sparkles from the facets of the stone that are forming the sand. He drew in his head. The light is too bright, mother, he said. It hurts my eyes. But what is that sweet sound I hear? Dear one, those are the white waves at play. They are the kind friends who carry your meals to shore. See, here is your father with a sea worm for your breakfast. Open your bill and swallow. He was the fluffy darling of his parents, their sole care and joy. Day after day, week after week, they waited on him by turns, guarding him and fishing for him, bringing him soft, delicious morsels of crab and pipi and tender fish. Pipi are a type of seashell that's native to New Zealand. I'm trying to describe it for you. They're about as long as the first part of my finger there, and a little bit wider, and they're kind of a creamy white colour, and they're not really thick, unlike some shells. They're quite thin, and it's a particular type of seashell that you can open up and eat the inside, I suppose, but obviously the birds eat them. But it's very much a New Zealand name for that particular type of shellfish. That's why I was explaining it to you. Under such faithful feeding he grew fast. Each day he looked over his ledge. The waves, mother, he said, the white, white waves, they are always calling. May I not go to sea yet? Not yet, his mother would reply. Baby gulls must wait till feathers grow in place of down. Down is the soft, fluffy feathers that they have when they're first born, hatched, which are not waterproof and do not fly well. Feathers grew in place of down. Baby wings broadened and grew strong, and at last he could fly. The waves still call, mother, he pleaded. Come then, said his mother at last, and down they all went to the sea, and the joy of life began. He was as yet only a mottled brown baby, not nearly so handsome as his dove-backed parents with their breasts of snow, but his pink webbed toes oared their way gleefully through the clear water, oared like oars, paddled gleefully through the water, and his little brown bill learned to snap the fleeing fish as cunningly as the crimson beaks of the older birds. What a life that was! They soared over restless waves on scarcely moving wings, swooping low and dropping where the flash of fins proclaimed a feast. They circled tiny bays whose seaweed carpets clothed the floors in rainbow hues, or rode like fairy craft upon the ever-rolling breakers of the shelving shores. Yes, the seagulls will sit on the water. It can be miles deep, but they'll sit on the water and just float there and have a rest and look around and maybe do some fishing from sitting. And then they can actually take off from the surface of the water. So that was that. I'm trying to find the right place again. Rode like fairy craft upon the ever-rolling breakers on the shelving shores. When fierce winds blew, they wheeled and screamed like spirits of the storm, laughing to see the surface of the sea torn up and flung against the high coast rocks. Slowly as the months rolled by, the little red bill's feathers changed from mottled brown to pearly grey and shining white. Pearly grey along the back, and then the rest of them, all of the tummy and the underside, is white, 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 and their heads too. Scarlet flamed on bill and feet, because when they're young, they have sort of a blacky, browny coloured feet and beaks, and then when they're adults, they go bright red. The full, bright beauty of his kind was on him. Mating season came. Little love, he said to his chosen one, I know an island where our egg will be safe and our baby sheltered. There, where white waves sing and dance all day, he shall be loved and tended as I was loved and tended. So they carry on the life cycle. The next section, part 2, the Sea-Squirt who stood on his head. Far out into the waters of a quiet bay stretched a wooden jetty, old and rotting and scarcely ever used. The browned and blackened timbers that showed above the waterline were by no means beautiful, but at their feet was fairyland. Here, in pale green clearness, forests of delicate seaweeds bent their gold and amber beads to the gentle movement of the water. Swift-finned fishes gay in scarlet and silver and bronze, swam the forest pathways and chased each other in and out. Cool shadowed bowers beneath the filmy branches, most beautiful of all, myriads of long-tubed sea-squirts waved their pink and crimson balls, little round bits on them, from the jetty piles like great closed poppies in the sea, like poppy buds. Poppies, they've got a stem that comes up and then they've got the whole of the flower is all closed in a round thing at the top. How they waved up and down, backwards and forwards, not moved by the water, but moving in the water, though never freed from the jetty piles. After all, these were not flowers, but animals. Continually they opened their pink round mouths to let the water pass through their bodies, in the hope that each fresh mouthful might contain a meal. Again and again, squirt! They were forced to throw out some fragment of shell or rock which had floated in and caused annoyance. At the foot of one pile there was some excitement, for a baby sea-squirt was setting out to see the world. He was impatient to be off. But his mother was giving him a great deal of advice. If you had seen him lying in the water, you would never have recognised him as the sea-squirt's son. No mother and son were ever more unalike. She was big, with a thick-skinned tube half a yard long and a ball at the top shaped like a quince. It's a type of fruit. He was tiny and soft and looked like a baby tadpole. She was gaily coloured. He was colourless and jelly-like. She was fixed to the jetty pile. He could swim. Yet in spite of these great differences, mother and son they were. "Dear child," she said, "whatever you do, never stand on your head." "Of course not," he replied. "I shall never wish to." "But you will wish to," cried his mother. "You won't be able to help it. It runs in the family. Listen, son. Once I was like you. I could swim and move about to find my food. Before me, all our grandfathers and grandmothers for millions of years back were for a part of their lives like you. If they had never stood on their heads, they might have grown eyes and backbones and fins and become as great and clever as the fishes. But because those old grandparents became lazy and stood on their heads till they grew to the rocks, we in turn have all grown lazy, and we in turn have been punished by the loss of our swimming powers. If you could only break loose from the family's bad habit, you might start a glorious free race of sea-squirts. All the most successful creatures in the sea are those that have backbones and eyes. You have the beginnings of these two things in you, but if you stand on your head, you will lose them, as I have done. You will become fixed and helpless like the seaweeds. Promise me never to stand on your head. Promise me that you will keep moving." "Yes, mother. Goodbye." "Oh, yes, yes, goodbye." The impatient little fellow could wait no longer. "How grown-ups talk," he thought, "as if I should ever wish to stand on my head." He swam about for several hours, enjoying himself exceedingly in this great wet world. Remember I was saying they have juvenile forms of some creatures? That's what he is. And they don't look like their final form, which is what she is. At last he came to the end pile of the jetty. Here, to his great astonishment, there suddenly came upon him the most overpowering desire to stand on his head. To stand on his head, the very thing his mother had foretold. Well, she was right after all, so perhaps she was right in advising him to keep moving. "I will swim on," he said. He swam on bravely, but before him was the wide open sea with no comfortable piles to rest against. And oh, how he longed to rest, just to put that heavy head of his down against something firm. How delightful that would be. That was a splendid pile, that last one, so strong and wide. It could not matter if he rested just a few minutes. He really would not stay long. So, forgetting his promise, this foolish baby swam back. Down went his head against the comfortable pile, and alas, there he has stayed ever since. His mother's wise words faded from his mind. He was too lazy to stir. From his head, tiny tubes grew on to the wood, holding him there for life. What a change has come over him, tail and little growing eye and backbone, All have died away. In their place has grown the long tube with the gaily coloured fleshy ball at its end, through which the water runs with every wave, bringing sometimes food, sometimes nothing but sand and stones. Gone are the old swimming powers, the old free life. Gone is all chance of growing into something strong and grand and successful. He is beautiful, but he is helpless. I wonder, does he ever think of what might have been? Does he ever say, sadly, if I had but kept moving on? The reality is you can't change the species that you are. Carrying on. Part 3. Bobby Barnacle's Wanderings. The Barnacles lived on the rocks with the mussels and limpets and red anemones. Not the same as anemones. Anemones are a type of flower. Anemones are a sea creature. There were hundreds and thousands and millions of little shell houses set so closely together that scarcely any room was left for pathways. Twice a day the friendly waves, like busy white-capped waiters, hurried up the shore with a feast of tiny sea creatures in their soft, wet hands. Then one by one doors were carefully opened, while the waiting shell people took in their food but were soon shut again for fear of lurking enemies. It was a quiet life, but so safe that the rocks became overcrowded. When Bobby Barnacle and his brothers and sisters and cousins were hatched out of their little egg cases and swam from their mother's acorn shell houses, the old Barnacles were alarmed. "Dear me," said the very oldest, "what a swarm of you! For goodness sake, don't come back here to settle after your swim. We are crowded already." "Plenty of room in the sea," laughed Bobby. "Come on, everyone. We are not thinking of settling down yet. We are going to have a grand time first. I am sure I shall never wish to spend all my time in one place. A roving life for me." We'll find out, won't we? I'm pretty sure we know where this is going. Headed by Bobby, the shoal of barnacle babies set off on their travels. They certainly did not look in the least like settling down. They swam and dived and frolicked and tumbled and whisked down on the dancing waves as if possessed by the very spirit of movement. To such atoms of energy, sitting still on a rock was plainly an impossibility. They were queer, tiny, soft-bodied creatures. Thin, delicate shields on their backs were their only shells. They each had 3 pairs of legs, 1 eye, and a funny, spiky tail. As they went, they ate hungrily, swallowing sea animals so tiny that scores of them would go into a small girl's thimble. "Look out!" Bobby shouted suddenly. As he spoke, he turned to the right and swam for dear life, hiding at last under a tangle of ferny seaweed. The others were too late to save themselves. A great fish had swallowed them all in 3 snaps of its cruel jaws, and Bobby was left alone in the wide sea. He was badly frightened, but presently he swam out from his hiding place and continued his travels. It was somewhat lonely, but he soon grew accustomed to that. Indeed, he began to like it. He swam and ate and whisked about in the water as cheerfully as ever, keeping his 1 eye well opened for possible enemies. A shoal of cousins from a sea rock met him. "Come and play with us," they said. "No," said Bobby, "I'm going to travel." Out to sea he went, amongst all the wonders of the white-crested water. Below him lay great colonies of bright corals and sponges and sea anemones, living their simple, quiet lives. Around him rushed and darted eager, busy fishes, keeping him ever on the move to evade their hungry jaws. Many a narrow escape he had, but he was so nimble that he never was caught. As he grew, his skin and shield became too small for him. "This is most uncomfortable," he thought. Split, skin and shield dropped off. New ones had been growing underneath, but these at first were soft, and he had to shelter under seaweed till they hardened. To his great comfort, they were soon firmer than the old ones. Several times he molted in this way, and each time the new skin and shield became harder and stronger, making him safer from his enemies. One day, a strange thing happened. He lost his appetite. "Whatever is the matter with me?" he wondered. He soon discovered he was changing his shape. Another eye grew, and 3 more pairs of legs, and a shield on the front as well as the back. Well, I am a fine, strong fellow now, he thought. I feel as if I could do wonders. He swam on faster than ever. Indeed, his activity was marvellous. He seemed to shoot through the water, but strangely enough he still could not eat, and so it is no wonder that at last he grew tired. I think I must settle down on something, he said. This life is really most exhausting, and yet I don't want to sit down on a rock and stay in one place all my life. I wish I could find something moving. Something moving came through the water, something so huge that to the tiny barnacle its side was like the side of a world. It was a whale. But Bobby was not afraid. As it slowly lifted its great body through the waves, he made his way to it and clung on with all his strength. The whale plunged on his mighty way to colder seas, bearing his little unfelt rider with him. "Hurrah!" said Bobby. "Now I shall still travel on without being obliged to do my own swimming." A more wonderful change than ever before came over him. A tiny bag of cement opened from his head and glued him to the whale's skin. 6 strong shells grew round him in an acorn ring, exactly like those of his mother's shell house on the rock. 4 more grew into a door. When he opened the door, he could shoot out his 12 curled legs and kick his food down into his mouth in the shell house. So there he was, living head down and toes up on the whale, and glued so tightly that he could never fall off. He was grown up now. All his changes were over. His appetite came back, and he went travelling easily and comfortably with the whale. For all you or I know to the contrary, his roving life may still be going on. I never thought of that, but yeah, that makes sense. Wow. Not the thinking about it from the barnacles' point of view, but the fact that the same barnacles that grow on rocks also can grow on, attach themselves to things like whales and stuff like that. We'll carry on. Next story. Number 4, Little Starfish. He floated in the depths of the cool salt sea, an egg so small as to remain unnoticed and undevoured. Later, he hatched into a queer-shaped creature, not at all like a starfish, rather like a lump of jelly, with a thick end pushed out here and there. He swam and ate and grew larger every day. From the seafood he ate, his wonderful little body had power to draw minute particles of lime and build them into a star-shaped framework within itself. Slowly the firm star grew, spreading its rays on every side and absorbing into itself the soft walls of his earlier body, until at last he was a starfish. He was strangely made. His mouth was underneath the middle of his body. A small red eye lay at the tip of each ray arm. His legs, scores of them, were small and white and could be pushed out or drawn in at will from his ray arms. Drawing in seawater through narrow passages in his body, he could fill these legs and make them firm, and so crawl up the steepest rocks or creep slowly over the smooth sea floor. When he did not wish to walk, he drew the water from his legs and tucked them up inside his arms. The last foot of each ray arm was at once his nose and finger, for by it he smelt and felt. On his back were spines, some of them snapping in the sea like scissor blades to keep his skin clean and free from parasites. He roamed slowly here and there in search of food. Companies of brother starfishes went with him. They were a hungry crowd, and so numerous that soon there was very little left to eat in their valley of the sea. "I shall travel," said Little Starfish. "Perhaps I shall find a better feeding place." He set off. Sometimes he swam. Sometimes he floated with the waves. Sometimes he dropped to the bottom and crawled over the sand or rocks. After several days, he came to land. The tide was going in. The waves were dancing gaily up the stony beach. "Carry me, please," said Little Starfish. he laid himself in the arms of a wave and was carried merrily up the beach and left in a pool amongst the rocks. "This is a good feeding place," said the wave as she set him down. It was indeed a good feeding place. All the rock creatures had opened their shells to feast on the myriads of tiny things brought in by the tide. The pool was awhirl with life. Shrimps darted to and fro, barnacles and limpets raised themselves from their rocks, furry-legged hermit crabs ran about under their borrowed shells. Best of all, tempting rock oysters, fat and juicy, sat with their shells agape to catch their daily meal. Little Starfish's mouth fairly watered at the sweet smell of them. Pushing out his scores of white sucker feet, he pulled himself up, inch by inch, to where the first one sat. As soon as the oyster felt him near, snap went the shell. But little Starfish was too quick for him. One strong ray arm was in the shell before the edges met, and hope was over for the oyster. Little Starfish swallowed him and then crawled on to find another as delicious. "So glad to find you home," he joked as he poked his arm into the next open shell. "We'll see about that," remarked the oyster. He snapped his shell hard. How it hurt. He was a powerful oyster, and the edges of the shell caught the arm in a tender spot. Crunch went the oyster viciously and broke off the arm in the middle. Little Starfish swam painfully away from that terrible oyster, leaving half an arm in the shell. "How tiresome," he said. "Now I shall have to give up travelling while I grow again." He crept away into a safe hiding place under the sea. There he grew a new half arm, coming out again as strong as ever, but far more cautious. Many another feast he had on the oyster rocks, but never again did he hunt so recklessly. Did you know that? Starfish can lose half an arm and grow a new one. There you go. They do. You can usually see where that's happened, that it's a new piece that's grown. But they are able to do it. How unusual. Part 5. Kelp, a tiny seaweed spore that's like a seed, but its spores are what mushrooms have spores that they use like other plants use seeds. Kelp obviously use ferns have spores, so they work a little bit differently to seeds, but they are used for growing new ones. A tiny seaweed spore loosened itself from its place in a forked branch of the mother seaweed, whirled itself round and round in the water, and began to sink towards the sea floor. A passing current caught it, lifted it, and carried it far past its old home to where a cluster of bare rocks guarded the shore. Here, broken up by the rocks, the current weakened. The spore, carried into the calmer waters of a sheltered pool, eddied, trembled, and slowly sank. From the spore sprang amber-coloured rootlets, fixing it firmly to a rock. I don't think this is the sort of thing that you see happening like that. I think this is stuff that just happens slowly over time, like the rootlets growing. From the spore sprang amber-coloured rootlets, fixing it firmly to a rock. A little amber-coloured stem grew upwards through the sea, growing ever thicker and stronger as the weeks went on, till at last it reached the top. Drawing its daily food from the nourishing sea, the plant went on from strength to strength. Amber branches grew, amber leaves, veined and thin and long, swayed with every movement of the water. Spores formed and loosed themselves and whirled and slowly sank, to grow in turn to neighbour plants amongst the rocks. Year after year passed by through the winter's rains and summer's gentle sun-kissed days, till many years had flown. From the tiny spore which in that earlier day was born so helplessly, had grown a mighty forest. Great lifting, drifting trees of kelp, their roots like iron bands about the rocks, their heavy limbs upheld by rows of air-filled floats, swayed back and forth with every rolling wave. Hidden, protected by the giant boughs. What life was here! What a wonderful scene of beauty! Delicate sea plants, red and purple and green, waved their slender fronds beneath the shelter of their stronger forest brothers. Bright-scaled fishes darted through the trees. Shellfish, safe in spiral-fluted homes, climbed their trunks and cut with saw-edged tongues sweet daily meals of amber leaf and stem. Sea urchins and starfishes crawled over their roots. Anemones spread their lovely cruel arms to catch their prey. Shellless sea snails, crystal clear, hid between the branches, peering out with bright black eyes at all that passed in this gay water world. At night, a million tiny, phosphorescent creatures shone and glowed from every leaf and branch and stone, as if a million fairy lanterns had been lit beneath the sea. A great storm came. Far out to sea the black clouds lowered. They loosed their lightning sheets. The leaden rollers rose and fell. That's the huge waves. And muttered to the thunder's crash. Seabirds screamed and fled to land. From the line where sea met sky came the hoarse, roaring wind, lashing little waves into foaming billows, tearing them up and flinging them far through the maddening air. Below the surface of the sea, the swimming, crawling creatures sank like startled shadows to look to the floor for safety till the storm was past. Only the great kelp trees were left to bear its brunt. Wave after wave crashed against the branches, tossed them this way and that, whipped off their floats and leaves, tore the slighter stems away, and strewed them high upon the rocks. When the storm was over, and sunny days had come again, and children played and paddled on the beach, the sand was strewn with little floats. The children stamped on them and laughed to hear them pop as the pent-up air escaped. One toddler wondered loudly what they were and where they grew. Down among the rocks, the wearied seaweed raised its torn and battered branches through the sea and set to work again to grow its slender stems, its ridge-veined leaves, its scores of pointed amber floats. Slowly its full beauty returned, till once again the fairy lights shone on the old gay life of Wonderland. And I am going to read the next one as well, but I'll have a mouthful of water first. Six. Black Shag. Black Shag was a lonely bird, but she liked her loneliness and drove away intruders. Her special haunt was a narrow inlet of the sea, winding between peaceful bush that overlooked the little lapping waves. Here she would swim for hours, her graceful head sometimes erect, sometimes bent beneath the sea to watch for prey. A silvery gleam, a movement of a fin, and like a hurled stone she would dive and pursue, hunting the fleeing fish until she overtook it. Seizing it in her long hooked bill, she bore it up into the air, there to gulp it whole down her capacious throat. That means there's a lot of room in her throat. Then below she would go again to hunt for further feasts. Her appetite was marvellous. She was no delicate lady in her feeding. Fortunately, fish were plentiful and varied in her inlet of the sea. Tired of swimming, she would fly up to her favourite perching place, a great bare rock that overhung the water. Here she spread her long black wings to dry them in the sun, and preened her bronzy back and white throat band and glossy breast. She could not, like a duck, shake herself but once and then be dry, for so little oil have her kind for their feathers that as wet as a shag has become a worldwide saying. But sun and winds helped her in drying, and time made no calls on her. For long hours she sat there at her ease, silent, solitary, satisfied. Winter passed, with the first warm breath of early spring, when fresh life awoke in bush and shore and sea. Her last year's mate came up the inlet, seeking her. Itchy eyelid. "Come with me," he said. At the words, mother longings stirred in Black Shag's heart. Into her thoughts came memories of nest and shining eggs, of helpless babies and her love for them. She left her rock. With her mate she flew along the coast to where her people built their rookery year by year. Here were friends and busy life, high cliffs facing the sea. On the top where strong, coarse grasses grew, nests were built beside each other. Sticks were gathered and twisted in and out. Grass blades were pulled and laid among the sticks. Then the nest was ready for the eggs. 3 handsome green-white eggs soon lay in Black Shag's nest. Then followed the long sitting, the mother's patient sacrifice of food and freedom, till at last the eggs were hatched and 3 half-fluffed, half-naked babies lay beneath the sheltering breast. They showed no beauty to a casual eye, but their mother thought them perfect. In her fond eyes no baby birds could be more sweet and lovable. Gone was now the old life for Black Shag, with its leisureliness and ease. With 3 children to feed and guard, the days became a rush of work. "You must help, father," she said to her mate. "You must help, father," she said to her mate. In turns they fished, swallowing enough for the babies as well as themselves, then returning to the nest and drawing up from their long food bags the delicious oily fish that the children loved. The babies grew fat. Fluffy down grew so thickly over them that they began to look like brown and white balls of wool. Nestling together, they kept one another warm. Gradually, Black Shag found herself able to leave them for longer and longer periods. They fished together now, she and the father Shag. As the children grew bigger still and more able to take care of themselves, the parents stayed away all day. They flew off in the morning to their favourite fishing waters, satisfied their own hunger, and loaded themselves with extra fish, then returned at nightfall to feed the clamouring little ones. The summer months passed by. In the nest, the children grew full-sized and feathered. "Learn to swim and fish for yourselves," cried Black Shag, and she tumbled them one by one into the water below. There they floundered about till they learned to paddle with their black webbed feet. Then the mother left them, knowing that her work for them was done. Back to her old haunt she went, to live again till spring returned, her life of leisured ease. In her narrow inlet, where peaceful bush overlooks the little lapping waves, she hunts her daily feasts, or sits for hours upon her bare brown rock, silent, satisfied, alone. There you go. Did you know that that's how they live, shags? I'm just seeing, no, I'm not going to keep on reading. That is it for today, folks. I hope you've learnt some new things, even if it's just having a totally different point of view of what the natural world is like. There you go. I am going to give you a couple of links. So I've given you, but I'll give it to you again. Our Discord server, you're welcome to join that. As I find, and as you find pictures of things relating to the stories that we're reading and the various books that we read, you're welcome to share them there. Some of the books we read, it's interesting to see whereabouts they're set and to find a map and share the map that shows where it is. Sometimes you come across pictures online that remind you of a place in a story, because sometimes the places that are actually imaginary, they're not real places, but we can see something online that reminds us of that, and that's a good way to share that with other people, see if we have any similarities in the way we've viewed them. So the second link I've put up is for those of you who are here on Twitch, which is where I read the stories live, and it's so that you can actually catch up with other stories I've read in the past. I have playlists that I have assembled on YouTube, and each playlist is a book or a couple of books sometimes together. So you can, if you want to use them like you would an audio book, you can start with the first video in the playlist and let it just autoplay right through the whole book, or come back to it whenever you want. But there's a really wide variety of different books that we've read. They're all children's books. They are all children's books. They're all old, but you're most welcome to do that. So one last bit of housekeeping, I suppose you could call it. If you're watching on Twitch and you want to know when I go live, then click on the heart button, which is below the video. And that means that you will be following me and Twitch will notify you. This is assuming that you've actually signed up to Twitch, which is free, by the way, if you haven't. You don't have to pay for using Twitch. And then that means that Twitch will tell you when I'm online. If you're online at the time, Twitch will tell you. And if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe. Once again, it's free. And that means it will show you in a list down the side of your screen. I'm waving it with my hand. It's like in a browser, not just using a Twitch app on your phone or something. That one has a different system. But it will show you when I put a new video up. So all the videos that I record on Twitch, I then save and I put them 2 weeks later over on YouTube into their playlists for the different books. But if you click the bell icon after you've hit the subscribe button, YouTube will notify you when I am live, just like Twitch will with the follow button. Okay, so you can do that. And also on YouTube, you can click the like button when you've enjoyed a story, and you can also comment there. You don't have to just sit there and be quiet the whole time. You can share some of the things you've learned. Whatever, doesn't matter. Anyway, we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.